Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master, Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Welcome to Window on the West, where we explore all the ages of Tolkien's Middle-earth, with your hosts, Jonathan Watson, Michael Grumbine, and Dan Coates.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us again this week as we continue our journey through the Silmarillion. My name is Jonathan Watson from theonering.com, and I'm here along with Michael Grumbine.
Hello.
And Daniel Coates.
Hey.
And this week we are on to Chapter 7 of the Silmarillion, of the Silmarils and the Unrest of the Noldor, kind of diving deep into the meat of it. So I'm really excited to get started on this. I know Michael's really excited to get started on this because this really feels like this is the good stuff. This is where we really get into it.
This is the chapter about which the book is named. So we finally get to meet the Silmarils.
Before we head into this chapter, we are going to do
All that is gold does not glitter.
And this week, Michael has some difficult things that I'm certain I won't get right again. So it's all yours.
All right. So for this week, the theme for the for our segment on All that is gold does not glitter is magic.
Magic.
So, quote number 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all about magic in some way, shape, or form. One of them is Tolkien. Here's the first quote. If you don't believe in magic, then you can't believe in reality. If you don't believe in magic, you can't believe in reality. All right. Quote number 2. Fairy is a perilous land, and in it are pitfalls for the unwary and dungeons for the overbold. Quote number 3. The more truly we can see life as a fairy tale, the more clearly the tale resolves itself into war with the dragon who is wasting fairyland.
Say that again. The more
truly we can see life as a fairy tale, the more clearly the tale resolves itself into war with the dragon who is wasting fairyland. And finally, quote number 4, all mirrors are magic mirrors. The commonest room is a room in a poem when I turn to the glass. All right. So one of those is Tolkien, and you definitely know the other 3 authors.
Okay. All right. So I'll go first. I feel like the last one, just the mirror thing, it makes me think of Lewis Carroll. So perhaps that's Lewis Carroll. The first quote, if you don't believe in magic, then you can't believe in reality. That just doesn't sound like Tolkien to me. Too many contractions in that sentence. But I could be wrong. And the third quote, the more truly we can see life as a fairy tale, the more clearly the tale resolves itself into war with the dragon who's wasting fairyland. I don't think Tolkien would say that. It just the whole the fairy tale idea. That wasn't his approach. See life as a fairy tale. His approach was more subcreation, not a fairy tale. So I'm going to go with number 2. It sounds like something I've read in on fairy stories, but I could be wrong. Fairy is a perilous land, and in it are pitfalls for the unwary and dungeons for the overbold. That's my guess.
So Jonathan guesses number 2, trying to redeem himself.
After many years, I think many months of failure.
You've gotten a number of them right. So maybe we can get a point counter above our heads someday in this podcast.
I don't know. Only if I'm winning.
All right, Daniel.
Just to be boring, I'll also go with number 2. That sounds the most Tolkien-esque to me.
All right. You guys are correct. I have failed to fool either of you for the first time. So
if the other ones, if you don't believe in magic, then you can't believe in reality.
So that is Benjamin. That's Benjamin Disraeli, the Prime Minister under Queen Victoria.
Interesting. That I would never have guessed at all whatsoever.
Yep. Probably the most famous prime minister Churchill can give him a run for his money, but historically speaking, anyway, he's one of the more famous prime ministers.
For sure, yeah. The more truly we can see life as a fairy tale, the more clearly the tale resolves itself into war with the dragon who is wasting fairyland. Wow. I have no frame of reference for who said that either.
Chesterton?
Yeah,
Yeah.
good job, Dan.
No.
So that is Chesterton, where he's saying that basically there is a dragon that's at war with the thing that gives life joy and is worth living, which is the fairy aspect of the world. So there's a dragon at war with fairyland, and the more we see a life as a fairy tale, the more clearly we also see the enemy of the fairy tale.
Do you know, is that which essay or book that's from?
I can't remember.
Okay. Just curious. That's curious.
I'm sure an internet
right,
search would
cool.
yield the result. But anyway,
Most likely. Maybe I can
and the
throw that
last
here at the
one,
bottom.
which was an odd one, that is actually George MacDonald.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That is an influence on Tolkien and Lewis too.
Yes, exactly. So Tolkien's one of Tolkien's big influences.
Yeah. I've never read him though. So it was just a guess.
He's worth reading.
Well, thanks. Thanks. So the line "Fairy is a perilous land, and in it are pitfalls for the unwary and dungeons for the overbold." Is that from On Fairy Stories?
It is.
Yeah, it is. So I think that's something we're going to have to go through at some point too, because it's a great essay, but it's very dense and it's very like it's something that it feels like you need to be taught it and then read through it a second or third or fourth time, kind of like Chesterton sometimes.
I'm a big fan of Socratic dialogues, and one of the best discussions I ever had about that was in college, Socratic dialogue style about
On Fairy Stories.
On Fairy Stories, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks, Michael. So as we jump into chapter 7 of the Silmarils, man, I got to get this right. Exactly what it's called. Of the Silmarils and the I don't have it in front of me. And the Unrest of the Noldor.
Yes.
I know the first part. All right, of the Silmarils and the Unrest of the Noldor, which means that Dan, this is your chance to come up with
Dan's Big Thought.
All right. My big thought this week: the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So in this chapter, you have Fëanor crafting the Silmarils, and presumably, at least he starts off with really, really good intentions. He kind of has this sense of impending doom, that something is coming, that the light is going to be extinguished, and he has to preserve and protect the light so that the light doesn't go out forever. And you kind of see that when he first does it, when he first crafts these gems to hold the light of the two trees, everyone is rejoicing. Everyone around him is excited and happy. Varda blesses the gems even and hallows them. So everyone's happy. It's a good thing that he made these Silmarils. But then there seems to there's a turn in Fëanor, that he goes from having this good intention to being puffed up with pride. I think Tolkien writes something to the effect that his heart was fast bound on the things that he himself had made. It was like his pride in what he had made and what he had done. And then Tolkien in this chapter also describes how he would wear the Silmarils on his brow, and he would go to banquets and kind of show them off. But then he kind of starts going into a mode where now he's hiding them. Now he's putting them in the vaults. Now he'll only show it to his dad and his sons and nobody else. So he went from having this thing that kind of blessed everybody to now this is mine. This is just for me and mine and nobody else's. So I think Tolkien, his exact words are, he began to love the Silmarils with a greedy love. And then he also says something like he forgot that the light that was inside those gems was not his own. So there's some really deep waters there of pride, of arrogance, of even with your good intentions, now your heart is being twisted and corrupted by the things that you've made. Go ahead.
I was just thinking that it really does reveal Tolkien is touching here on another theme that's that happens over and over again, which is the creatures of Iluvatar, be they Valar, be they Eldar, be they Min, be they dwarves, they seek to create. And when they create, almost invariably, if they create something beautiful and worthwhile, not almost invariably, but many times, that there's a tension in the creation where if they can grow to love their own creation too much, or even seek too much the desire to create, like Melkor, like Aule, even though he repents of it. There's this natural tension between what is good in that they're imitating their creator in creating new things. In this case, the Silmarils with Fëanor, and this dark side of creation, which is that you're drawn to love your work, the work of your hands, more than you ought, and it creates issues. So that's interesting. But I do think we should also talk about the Silmarils themselves, because the description he gives is just gorgeous. I love it. They're beautiful, and it's kind of the height. We learned in the previous chapter about the other gems that Fëanor created, the runes and writing that he created, and the palantiry that he created. These are the greatest, though. And it says, as three great jewels they were informed, these are the Silmarils, but not until the end, that's capital E end, when Fëanor shall return, who perished ere the sun was made, and sits now in the halls of awaiting, and comes no more among his kin. Not until the sun passes and the moon falls shall it be known of what substance they were made. These are the Silmarils. Like the crystal of diamonds it appeared, and yet more strong than adamant, so that no violence could mar it or break it within the kingdom of Arda. Yet that crystal was to the Silmarils but as is the body to the children of Iluvatar, the house of its inner fire that is within it, and yet in all parts of it, and is its life. So you have the housing of the Silmarils, which is the gems themselves, which are so stronger than diamond, that they cannot. They're literally indestructible. Even the Valar can't destroy the Silmarils. So the idea that a child of Iluvatar, an elf, created something greater, even in its imperishability than what the Valar can create, is fascinating. But that wasn't the best part of it. The best part was the light from the two trees, which you already mentioned, Dan.
It's interesting to me that the way Tolkien describes them is as living things, and that they rejoiced in light. And if I'm reading that right, it says, and yet as they were indeed living things, they rejoiced in light and received it and gave it back in hues more marvelous than before. So they, being the Silmarils, they rejoiced. There was even an emotional quality to the light.
I think we got to be careful with the wording. It says, and yet, as were they indeed living things, they rejoiced in light and received it and gave it back in hues more marvelous than before.
I flipped the words.
So, no, it's easy to do, but it's so he's deliberately teasing you with this idea that they're almost living. It's almost like they're living.
Kind of like the One Ring.
Yeah, I mean, that's the subject of so many great debates. Is it, to what extent does the ring have a will of its own? To what extent is it a semi-living thing, almost like a virus? That's my theory. It's more like a virus than a truly living thing. But anyway, it's fascinating. These are the good version of the One Ring. And they remain good. Throughout the entire book. The Silmarils themselves are never corrupted. The people that seek them are often corrupted, but not the Silmarils.
And the first person who seeks that is Melkor. Ultimately, outside. Well, I mean, like you said, Dan, Fëanor lusted. He himself lusted after them, and he jealously held them after displaying them on his brow, like you said. But Melkor lusted for the Silmarils, and the very memory of their radiance was a gnawing fire in his heart. Fire again, man! I didn't realize how often fire becomes it's either a great thing that gives light or something that gnaws at you and burns you up.
That's right.
But for him, it burned him up, and that's what it prompted him to, like he wrote, dissemble his purposes with cunning, and nothing of his malice could yet be seen in the semblance that he wore. And I think my favorite line in this entire chapter is the next two sentences, or really the next sentence, where Tolkien writes, "But he that sows lies," as Melkor was doing within the Noldor, "but he that sows lies in the end shall not lack of a harvest, and soon he may rest from toil indeed, while others reap and sow in his stead." And what a great way of encapsulating what he did with the Noldor, whereas he was sowing all the lies, and he was laying the groundwork for the destruction coming, but he didn't. He set it in motion, but he didn't keep turning the gears. Right? It was the Noldor, so they kept reaping and sowing in his stead because he planted all those seeds. I love the way he puts that in one short sentence, so succinct, but with so much I don't know, with so much power. My favorite line in the whole chapter.
Yeah, it's gorgeous prose. As you know, you find these gems, pun intended, I guess, in this particular chapter. You find these gems in Tolkien.
Dad.
Sorry, I'm a dad.
Tolkien dad joke. Yeah, jeez.
So if you listen to this podcast, you got to deal with the occasional dad joke, since it's a podcast from three dads. So, you're right that now. So the chapter transitions from the creation of the Silmarils to now what Melkor, and Melkor's first his lust for the Silmarils and then his sowing of the lies, continuing on from the very end of the last chapter. And these lies take root. And his lie, what struck me about it was his primary lie, like all the best lies, is built around a kernel of truth. And that is the lie that, let's start with the truth. The truth that the Valar had withheld the knowledge of men from the Elves. So the Elves didn't know about the coming of the second of the children of Ilúvatar, second born. And so Melkor reveals it to them and says, this is a sign the Valar are withholding this from you. And because they seek to make you thralls, essentially, because the men will come and supplant you. And so he tells them this lie, which is this kernel of truth, starts with the kernel of truth, which is the Valar didn't tell them about the coming of the men. And then that blossoms and is harvested, reaped and harvested to create what is ultimately the first direct conflict. First, it results in the elves making arms and armor for the first time. So that arms and armor had never been made, presumably without the arms that one would hunt with. I guess the implements of hunting would be an exception to that, but strictly speaking, tools for hunting are not can be used as weapons, but they're not designed as weapons of war, where one rational being is fighting another rational being. So I guess we have the creation of weapons and arms, and then that eventually leads to the strife between Fëanor and his brother Fingolfin. I don't know if we want to talk about that.
Yeah, well, it's Melkor who encourages the Noldor to build the arms, to build the weapons of war, and
That's right.
Swords, axes, and spears. Do they talk about hauberks and helms at all? I don't.
Helms only, not hauberks.
Tall helms with plumes of red. Yeah. So he does that, which is also a weapon of war in the sense that you're defending yourself, knowing that somebody's going to be fighting against you. So it's not just that. But yeah, this is where Finwë was troubled, and he summoned all his lords to council. And then Fëanor comes in, and he says, "So it is, even as I guessed, my half brother would be before me with my father," because Fingolfin was there, right? He was already talking with his father. And so he takes out his swords and he sticks it in this nice cinematic moment right into his chest. Like not like he pokes him and he doesn't like run him through. But he says, "My half brother would be before me with my father in this, as in all other matters." Then turning upon Fingolfin, he drew his sword, crying, "Get thee gone and take thy due place." And that sort of that statement is the reaping of the lies of Melkor right there, where turning the brothers against each other, turning the Noldor against each other, and then ultimately all the Eldor against themselves.
Yeah, and it's that scene right after what you read. It's interesting. He uses the language of Melkor. Fëanor uses the language of Melkor. He says, "This, see, half brother, this is sharper than thy tongue." He's putting his sword against his chest. "Try but once more to usurp my place in the love of my father, and maybe it will rid the Noldor of one who seeks to be the master of thralls." So to refer
and to Fëanor, define a thrall would be a slave,
right? So for Fëanor to refer to his own people as thralls, because he's accusing his half brother of usurping him and trying to become the master of thralls, means that he's using the language of Melkor, who tried to convince the Noldor that the Valar wanted them all to be thralls. So even though no doubt Fëanor would bristle at this realization, he's in fact absorbed the lie of Melkor in his own accusation against his brother.
Yeah, it's interesting to me at this moment. They haven't quite fallen. If we're going back to that Genesis analogy that we often go back to, like if this is Tolkien's Genesis, They haven't quite had like their original sin and fallen into sin yet, but you still feel like this is the kind of like the Cain and Abel moment of brother against brother. They're raising armies. They have armor and weapons. What do they need weapons for? They're in the blessed realm. They're basically in the Garden of Eden, right?
Exactly.
And they're raising these armies and weapons and military might. And you have one brother. Like, how outrageous is that to have someone like stick their sword on their brother's chest? Like, it's just so crazy to me.
Right. And similarly, there were really no weapons in the Cain and Abel story until Cain slew Abel. There was nothing to do that. And so here we also have the weapons being constructed for the first time in a brother versus brother duel.
So in a manner unlike their usual MO, the Valar in this particular instance respond very quickly. So usually they take their time responding, but this time
So we're going to have a whole video of the Valar sins, right? We're going to have a counter where they had sins and where they positives and negatives.
Yeah, the counter. I like that as an additional content video because they've got some sins to count up, but in this case they very quickly bring Fëanor to judgment and summon him before the Valar. And standing before, it says, and Fëanor, standing before Mandos in the Ring of Doom, was commanded to answer all that was asked of him. Then at last the root was laid bare, and the malice of Melkor revealed. And straightway Tulkas left the council to lay hands on him and bring him to judgment. So the first thing that happens is Fëanor tells all the... it's interesting because Fëanor just has accusations for his brother, but in front of the Valar, he has to tell the root of where these came from. And it turns out that it's Melkor. And so immediately Tulkas, who's always itching to throw his hands around Melkor's neck, heads off to do so. And we will find out that's unsuccessful. But Fëanor, it says, but Fëanor was not held guiltless, for he it was that had broken the peace of Valinor and drawn his sword upon his kinsman. And so to stop there for a second, referencing what you said, Dan, interestingly enough, that act of drawing his sword, that seems like a sin there, right? And so on a personal level, Fëanor has in fact sinned because he's you can argue one way or another about the creation of arms that aren't used against anyone, but when he draws his sword against his brother without cause or defense or need for defense, then that's a sin, and the Valar treat it as such because they punish him for it. And Mandos says to him, this is Mandos sort of mocking his own words against his brother. Mandos says, thou speakest of thraldom. If thraldom it be, thou canst not escape it, for Manwë is king of Arda, and not of Aman alone. So he's saying essentially, if your definition of thraldom is just having to live under the rule of another person, then guess what? You're always going to be a thrall, dude. Yeah. Everyone's a thrall if that's your definition.
He's the king of the world.
That's right. But then he says, and this deed is unlawful. Was unlawful whether in Aman or not in Aman. And then so he sentences him to essentially leave the city of the Elves, Tirion, and live alone, or at least live with his own small household for 12 years, which seems like a harsh penalty to us, maybe as humans, for 12 years for just drawing your sword and pointing it at your brother's chest. But for elves who live forever, 12 years is not that much.
Certainly not the 3 ages of something that Melkor
right.
talked about in the last episode. Yeah,
I like this picture. I like this picture of the Valar being like the lazy dad who's hanging out in the garage all day. And they're like, hey, Dad, they're raising armies over there. He's like, whatever, I don't care. And then all of a sudden, like, bam, someone gets punched in the face or something. It's like, okay, now I'm going to get involved. Now I'm going to do something.
Yeah. Get between the neighbor kids.
Yeah.
That's right. So what's been going on? Well, my neighbor said this, and your neighbor said that, did they? The analogy you could build with the dad correcting his children.
As long as it's your son that says, "I will release my friend," as Fingolfin here says to Mandos that he will release his brother after 12 years from the sins that he caused.
Right, and Fingolfin's an interesting character, as we'll see down the line. He's got a lot of nobility. he's got some of the flaws of the Noldor. But one of his flaws is not resentment. So he shows clearly in this passage that then and in another place very soon that he's instantly ready to forgive his brother or for the attack against him or any slights against him. So the next section is Melkor fleeing, and he turns into a cloud. There's an interesting passage there when it says, "He hid himself and passed from place to place as a cloud in the hills, and Tolkien sought for him in vain." But it isn't just that he takes the form of a cloud, but he somehow affects all of Valinor in doing
all
so.
the light.
Yeah, it's interesting. So because it says, "Then it seemed to the people of Valinor that the light of the trees was dimmed, and the shadows of all standing things grew longer and darker in that time." And at first you might think, well, they're just thinking that because they realize they've been deceived, the Noldor have been deceived, and it's just kind of a psychological effect. But we find out later that when Melkor, in form of a cloud, passes south and leaves Valinor to hide in the south, that the light of the trees brightens again. So it's actually an effect from his physical form at that point, which is interesting.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the line. I think it was in the previous chapter where where Tolkien actually writes that Melkor was essentially the strongest of all the Valar, and that would seem to be true if he's actually affecting the light of the trees in his passing,
right?
In his retreat, in a sense, from.
And somehow taking that form of a cloud does that too. He must be exerting his power in some way to dim the light of the land around him.
Yeah. Yeah, and then where does he go? He goes back to Fēanor because he can't, because the fire of the Silmarils is gnawing inside of him.
Right.
And so I love Fëanor's line after he's trying to say, that the Valar are going to take it from him, and that hey, I've been a friend the whole time, and I'm the most skilled, and you should let me let me help you out because I was there to help you earlier. And he says, "Get thee gone from my gate, thou Jailcrow of Mandos."
It's awesome.
Like he says this to the most powerful being essentially on the face of the planet, and slams the door in front of him, and then Melkor departs in shame. Like when Tolkien says Fëanor was the strongest of all the elves that had ever lived, like this is like, I think, example number one where he just slams the door in the face of Melkor, the strongest of all of the Valar.
Exactly. The line is, "And he shut the doors of his house in the face of the mightiest of all the dwellers."
Yeah, there it is. Yeah. Okay, so it wasn't in this chapter. I just missed it and missed the next line.
Yep. Yeah. It's great. Just his prose is so crisp and covers so much ground in a small amount of time sometimes, in terms of writing not just narrative but motivations and helping you understand some of the deeper issues. Yeah, it's fascinating. I always was fascinated by the I don't know what you want to call it. What is it when a person who's punished transfers their dislike of their punishment to the person that actually carries it out? You see it a lot with people growing to hate police officers, for example, where there's so Fëanor does this with Mandos. Like, Mandos only speaks the judgment of Manwë. Like, this is distributive justice model, right? So Manwë has a judgment. Mandos speaks it, and he only speaks in judgment when Manwë is that's Manwë's thought and judgment. And so, but Fëanor blames him, and then so said, "Now Fëanor's heart was still bitter at his humiliation before Mandos." And he looks at Melkor in silence, and then he accuses Melkor of being the Jailcrow of Mandos. So he's like sort of attaching all of his ire to Mandos, which is
like the old "don't blame the messenger."
Right. Well, he's definitely blaming the messenger.
Yeah.
And but interestingly, he does it because he perceives clearly the mind of Melkor. Like, he sees through his form and perceives that Melkor just desires the Silmarils. So he hates him. So then off Melkor goes as a thundercloud and then escapes to the south. And that was the line I was looking for before. It says, "Thus Melkor departed from Valinor, and for a while the two trees shone again unshadowed, and the land was filled with light." So once he leaves the land in cloud form,
clear again, we
get light again, or at least unshadowed light.
Yeah. For a little while until the next chapter, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One thing that, like, maybe my final thought, and I'll get to you what your guys' final thoughts would be. My final thought is one of the things that's been talked about is Galadriel a lot because of the Rings of Power. the show, Amazon show, coming out. And in the very first line of this chapter, Tolkien writes that Fëanor was filled with a new thought, or maybe that some shadow of foreknowledge came to him of the doom that drew near, right? And they're talking about foreknowledge, which was something Galadriel had, which Tolkien talks about with her, right? She was able to essentially have an idea of things to come. And there is some debate. Tolkien explicitly states that Galadriel was the most powerful elf after Fëanor. But other people don't think so. Other people think other people have. And so I think maybe this is a part of it. And it's not in swords. It's not in big hilts. It's not in being able to grab a dagger, jab it into some ice and climb a glacier. It's in the foreknowledge. It's in the power that she was able to have to protect and to influence people, and to influence in a good way, and to perceive the mind of the enemy. And I think, and the mind of the enemy, and the mind of, I think also her, her friends, in that knowing what was good and right and the best thing to do in order to protect the elves and to protect the elven kingdoms, that was her strength. And so that's why she knew she had to go to Lorien to help protect Eregion from the assault of Sauron as much as she could. Anyway, just the thought of like the foreknowledge being a really important thing when it comes to the power that you have as an elf. So.
Right. No, there's a connection. If you have foreknowledge, you are connected with the song of creation.
Ooh, I like that. I hadn't thought about it in those terms.
So I mean, that's Mandos' express realm, is being connected with the song to the extent where he knows everything that's happened and will happen, except for the relatively small number of things that Iluvatar takes a direct hand in, and is according to Iluvatar's direct choice. And so the secret fire that burns within Fëanor, I think, to build on your point, Jonathan, is connected with his foreknowledge. Like this is the fire of creation, and the connection with the song of the world, song of Arda that created all, that Iluvatar used to create all. These are interconnected, and Fëanor has that, and so does Galadriel with her. She also has foreknowledge and that gift. And we can talk later about Galadriel's power when she comes up, because she actually has raw power too, which is shown in some of the things that Tolkien says in appendices. Not just wisdom, power of wisdom and foreknowledge, but she definitely has those things too. Yeah. But by raw power, I'm not talking about the ability to swing a sword. I would actually contend, following the reading of the Silmarillion, that, and we can get back to this, that actually Fëanor was not, in fact, the greatest warrior elf either. He was the most powerful elf ever, but I bet you his half-brother in his height could have bested him. His half-brother, who ends up, well, never mind, we won't do spoilers, but in terms of pure sword play and as a warrior. But
Fingolfin, you mean?
Yes, Fingolfin is what I'm talking about. So I guess technically there's a number of half-brothers, but yeah, I'm talking about Fingolfin. So yeah, there's so many more ways to be powerful than just swinging a sword.
Yeah. All right. So that was my final thought. Dan, Michael, do you have one of you guys have a final thought as well?
I'll count what I just said as my final thought.
All right.
I guess if I have a final thought, it's coming from somebody who's seen the Lord of the Rings Peter Jackson trilogy probably 20 or 30 times, probably. My impression of elves from those movies is that they're so hoity-toity. They're high. They're noble. They're good. They're just a pure good all the time, and they always have like this air of
they're like the Nancy Pelosi to the Ted Cruz.
Well,
that's not going to get anyone in trouble ever.
They're basically like, men are trouble. They're all about fighting. They're all about wars. They're all about they have all these problems. Don't get involved with the affairs of men. But reading the Silmarillion, you're like, bro, look at what you guys are doing. Look what you guys did to yourselves. So you see them raising armies in the Blessed Land. You got one guy pointing a sword at the other guy, and it looks like in later chapters it's going to get worse and worse. But
it gets worse.
It's like, bro, like look at yourself. Like, so I don't know. Maybe that's a Peter Jackson invention, or maybe that's something I didn't pick up in Lord of the Rings. My picture of elves before reading the Silmarillion was like, oh man, elves are great. They're so cool and they're so good all the time. And reading this, I'm like, oh, maybe not so much. Like,
So
Yeah, with the elves and Peter Jackson, you need to have the warm synthesizer sound playing in the background all the time.
yeah,
And yeah,
well, while I don't think the elves in Tolkien's world in the time of Lord of the Rings are perfect, there's a few examples we could give of elves that make mistakes. They don't display the gravity of flaws that he's focusing on in the Silmarillion. So
yeah.
by the time, and I might even make a further point, building on what you said, Dan, to just say the elves, especially the Noldor that are left in the time of Lord of the Rings, you could probably make a case that you could say that those survivors have learned a lesson, a hard, long lesson, and they are in fact enlightened in ways and sort of above the affairs of men in ways that I don't think Jackson got it totally wrong on. But these are a different. This is a different time, and the elves have yet to learn from their unnumbered tears the ways that the mistakes that they can make. So
don't worry, we'll see so much of that in the Rings of Power coming to you on Amazon Prime, where they compress 1,800 years down to a few seasons. It's going to be great.
You got to give it a chance. It might be good. You don't know.
right.
Sure. Might be.
We will in fact
I have a chance. Wasn't that a quote from Dumb and Dumber? So
Yeah.
So
you're telling me there's a chance? Yep, I give it about the same chance as the Dumb and Dumber movie.
Yeah. Well, if you want to see our thoughts on that, go to our YouTube channel if you're not already watching this on YouTube, because we do have some thoughts on that. We'll see. Hey, I'll watch it, and I'll probably like parts of it. And if I hated the Fellowship of the Ring when I saw it coming out of the theaters, I can only imagine what I'm going to feel like coming out of this one. So, not that I don't hate Fellowship of the Ring anymore by Peter Jackson, but I have my issues still with it. So
Yeah. Well, and I think we're going to have fun, watching it, and probably have plenty of reactions to it. So that'll be fun.
For sure. All right. So next week we are on to chapter 8, which is of the darkening of Valinor, where we get to see more of this crazy cloud and other darkness coming over.
Grand villain number 2 makes their appearance.
I'm excited. I love that part. But before we do that, let's head over to
If You Like Tolkien.
And I think, Michael, this week you might have something behind you.
So it is behind me. I don't know how good my video quality is, but it's a little bit of a cottage industry amongst folks that are fans of Tolkien, and I'll get it right here.
Cool.
So this is a gift that I got, and so I can't say who the exact maker is. It was made by an Etsy shop in Eastern Europe.
If you're listening, this is a pipe.
This is a pipe, a carved pipe with a beautiful tree of Gondor on it, and despite the fact that it looks fancy, it is also an excellent pipe. It has a good draw. It's a church organ style, and it was given to me as a gift. I cannot comment on the potential breaking of copyright or lack thereof, since I'm not a lawyer and I don't know how to even play one on TV.
I think half of Etsy is breaking copyrights.
Right.
I think we're okay.
I think most of Etsy perhaps is a copyright violation of some kind or another. But anyway, it's a beautiful pipe, and there's a whole, as I said, cottage industry of craftsmen out there that make some beautiful stuff that are Lord of the Rings themed. So
I need to get me one of those. I'll try and find one, put a link in the show notes to that, but that's pretty sweet. I only have Tolkien books back here. I don't want to get any of this third-party crap. I'm joking. So cool. Plus, I can't ever keep a pipe lit for the life of me. That's why I just stick with cigars when I do. So,
well, I'm convinced. I think I've told people before that have, especially in the cigar group, I'm convinced that the reason that pipe smoking is so difficult is basically it makes it the most healthy of all the smoking habits that you have, because you work so hard to get so little nicotine in your body.
Yeah, you're working harder to keep it lit than doing anything else.
Exactly.
So you're just exerting all this energy and sweat and tears.
But you know what? It looks really good when you got it lit.
Yeah, especially when it looks like something that Gandalf or a new character in Rings of Power would have smoked. I got to stop with the Rings of Power things. All right, so next week, that's good. So pipes, we'll put a link in the show notes or below in YouTube. But next week we'll do Of the Darkening of Valinor, and we get to meet, like Michael said, the big baddie number 2 for the first time and almost the last time in this book. It's gonna be great. So till next week, we'll see you then.
Michael, Dan, and Jonathan want to thank you, the listener, for joining us. Visit us at theonering.com, your source for everything Tolkien, where you can comment on this episode and join the conversation. This is Austin Robertson, bidding you farewell. May the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks.